Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, everybody on the West Coast. We're here today to talk about the future of the CMS, centrally managed context-aware content across all devices and experiences. I'm going to shut off my video for the remainder of this presentation until we do the Q&A so that you can more easily focus on the slides and not my eyes bouncing around the screen as I read notes. So introductions, again, my name is Todd Nienkerk. I'm CEO and co-founder of 4Kitchens. If you want to contact me afterwards, I'm happy to hear and field any of your questions or hear feedback or commentary or even some of your own experiences working with content management systems and some of the newer techniques that we're going to talk about today. You can reach me at todd@4kitchens.com or on Twitter at Todd Ross. And if you do send out anything on social media, we'd ask that you use the hashtag #FutureCMS. So we are here today because I want you to rethink how we manage, publish, and consume content. We're going to talk about what a CMS used to do. We're going to talk about what a CMS should do tomorrow. We're going to give examples of some ways to construct CMSs and some of these new architectures. And then we're going to do some very future thinking ideation around what's coming up next and what are some things we need to pay attention to in the coming years. So to understand the future, we must understand our past. Let's talk about what a CMS used to do. So in the 1990s, when the web was first invented in 1993, we were dealing mostly with flat files, HTML files, .htm files. And these were all uploaded to a web server, usually using something like FTP, and that's how we managed all of our sites. When that became a little too cumbersome, there were tools like Frontpage that came along that would allow you to better manage those flat files, but in essence, you were still just dealing with files. Markup, in the late 90s, CSS, some images, some assets, a lot of blinking GIFs, but for the most part, it was just flat files being uploaded to a server and maybe managed through some kind of desktop application like Frontpage. Shortly though, Geocities came along. And Geocities was really unique, and there were some Geocities-like sites like Tripod and AngelFire and things like that. They were kind of unique in that these were websites that stored and displayed your website. So you would log into a website, manage the markup and the content within a web interface, hit save, and that then displayed the website itself. So in a way, sites like Geocities, AngelFire, Tripod, and the rest were really the world's first web-based CMSs. It's kind of interesting to think of them that way, but that's truly what it was. If you think about the workflow that we have for modern CMSs, it's pretty similar. You access all of your content through a web page and a form, and you hit save, and the content is updated. So real quick, let's take a quick trip down memory lane here. Who can forget everybody's favorite website, Space Jam, and of course the original apple.com. So the next time someone tells you they want their website to look like apple.com, just show them this. So a decade later, in the 2000s, we had the rise of web-based CMSs. Drupal was released in 2000, WordPress in 2003, .NET Nuke in 2003, and Joomla in 2005. So in the first half of the 2000s, we had the rise of a lot of these open source or now open sourced web-based content management systems. And these really revolutionized the way that we think about websites, the way we think about our content and how we manage it, and the ways that we interact with them. So this is what it looked like in the 2000s, and even today to some extent. These CMSs are often divided between the front end, meaning the display of the content, and the back end, the management of your content. In Drupal, that's the difference between looking at a node or a blog post and then clicking edit and seeing all of the forms associated with it. So that's the front end versus the back end. So at first, we could display this content in a web browser. So in the early 2000s, we all had laptops and desktops and things like that, and this front end that we would experience would be just a website on a browser. And then along came things like RSS and Atom and these feed technologies that allowed us to more easily syndicate our content using a global standard to other sites. So this then gave rise to all kinds of news aggregation services and things like Google Reader, and it allowed a lot of content producers to send their content to places, whereas previously, everybody would have to come to their site to see their content. This allowed them to distribute it outwards. Then along came smartphones and tablets, and in fact, this month we are celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the release of the iPhone. It's hard to believe that it was only 10 years ago and how much things have changed in the interim, but that ushered in a whole revolution in the way that we think about design and approach design, and really reinvigorated the life and the vibrancy of the web and the browsers that interpret web content and display them. But interestingly, though we fundamentally changed the way we consume content and the way that we design for it, we did not fundamentally change our approach to content management. On the back end, despite this major revolution, CMS is still stored a lot of text-based content, a lot of media assets, images, sound files, video files, and user-generated content, usually taking the form of something like comments or a forum. Now, as these CMSs became more and more popular, they had to integrate all of this kind of stuff. They had to deal with both text and media assets, and of course, user comments. And if you have user comments, that generally means that you need to have user accounts, because you want people to be able to sign in and see their comments and see who replies to them. So then CMSs started adding all of this other functionality around users and user profiles. And of course, if you have users and user profiles, you have to have permission systems, because you don't want a CMS where you can log in and create an account and anybody can edit all the content on the site. Of course not. You just want them to be able to edit the content that you want them to edit, like their own comments or their user profiles. So then we had to add in all of this permission stuff. Then eventually, as these CMSs became more popular and more people used them to manage their content, people started asking for things like layout management. You know, I want a tool where I can add blocks through a graphical user interface, or I want to click and drag things, or I want to create 4 to 5 different layout types that I can choose for a blog post or a story or a content type. And more of that kind of functionality got put into these CMSs. We see it today in Drupal with things like views and panels and Panelizer and Panoply and stuff like that. And as our CMSs became more of an integral part of our digital strategy, we of course wanted to integrate them with other services. We wanted to integrate them with our CRM. So maybe our users came from our CRM instead of our CMS. Maybe we want to incorporate e-commerce functionality or a learning management system or third-party data services or governmental procurement systems or any number of things that you would want to then glue into your CMS. So this is what has made our CMS infrastructure in the 2000s and leading up to today so heavy and complicated. And CMSs, frankly, are really no longer about content management. They're about website management. It's about managing users and permissions and layouts and integrations, and content. So think back to the early days of Drupal. One of the interesting bits of history of Drupal that has been lost a little bit over the past few years is Drupal started as a content management system, and then it kind of morphed into something else as it started to integrate a lot of these things like user management. There was a time when Drupal referred to itself as a, quote, community plumbing tool. I don't know how many of you may remember that, but there was a very long stretch of time where Drupal marketed itself not as a content management system, but as community plumbing, which is an interesting little bit of Drupal history and a snapshot of what the focus was at that time. So this is the world that we've lived in the 2000s, and we more or less have lived in until very recently. And because these CMSs have become so heavy and so integrated with all of these other services, people have had to prop up new websites every time they wanted to add something to their digital strategy. So in the early days of mobile web, when we were dealing with feature phones like BlackBerry and Windows Phone and Nokia and things like that, a lot of people would create mobile versions of their websites. We'd have m.dot sites, you know, m.cnn.com, m.economist.com. And it was essentially a completely separate website, and in many cases, a completely separate CMS that existed solely to work on mobile devices. And there was some kind of a user agent detection system that would know that you were on a mobile device, and then it would forward you to this completely different website. So now you're dealing with 2 extra sites. Well, in recent years, marketing teams and Groups have asked for things like microsites. So every time you want to fire up a new marketing campaign or some kind of new product launch or maybe an event or a fundraiser, well, you got to fire up a microsite for that, right? Well, that's going to be its own website, and it might not be in Drupal. It might not be in WordPress. Maybe it's just a handful of HTML files, or maybe you went to Squarespace to create your microsite because your IT department was too overloaded building and maintaining all of these other things that you thought, oh, forget about it. I'll just go build my own thing on Squarespace. So now in your digital strategy portfolio, you've got all these microsites and they're disconnected from your main website entirely. And then, maybe there's a new blog that you want to launch and it has a unique audience and a unique target, but there's no way for you to separate that out from the content on your main website. So, well, you better launch a new WordPress site and that'll be a blog. And then the iPhone comes along and you want these iPhone apps, and well, your website isn't really structured to take that on. So you better create a new website just for managing all of the content in your iPhone app. And until pretty recently, this has been what we've all dealt with. We've dealt with these isolated, siloed, islanded sites that all have to be maintained, that are all running different kinds of software, and that aren't really tied together in any way. So that brings us what CMSs need to do tomorrow. But the funny thing about the future is that the future eventually becomes the present. And this is especially true in technology. I've been giving this talk for about 3 years now, and I rewrite it at least once a year. And I mean completely rewrite it. I tear the whole thing down and rewrite it entirely. And each time that what's next section that I teased earlier gets moved under this one, the what's now section. So what we used to consider the CMS tomorrow is actually the CMS of today. So let's talk about what your CMS, what a modern CMS should be doing right now. First and foremost, above all, a modern CMS needs to put content management first. We have to get back to our roots. We have to deprioritize user management, layout tools, additional functionality. We don't have to eliminate it. Rather, we need to re-elevate the importance of content so that the site can better serve its purpose. We also need to stop confusing CMSs with development platforms. And frankly, I feel that Drupal is a little bit confused in this sense. It's effectively both a content management system and a platform. And I'm not picking on Drupal in particular. Most large open source content management systems are confused in this way. It's equal parts development platform and content management system. And all of these CMSs really need to pick one or the other, or they will be bad at both. We also often confuse content management with content display. And we have to keep the display of our content and the management of our content separate, because we don't really know how the content is going to be displayed in what device or in what context. So we have to be display and device agnostic when we manage our content. So for example, here's a tangible example of what I mean by that. Let's consider the Drupal views functionality. This used to be a third-party contrib module up until Drupal 8. It's now in core. Drupal views should not be thought of as a way to display content on a Drupal site. However, that's how most people think of Drupal views. When they think about making a view, they think about displaying a list of teasers of posts. But we should not think about it as a display tool. Instead, views should be used to create collections of content that is accessible to an API and multiple devices and experiences. What makes views powerful is that it supplies content data and information to an API, not just a front-end display. Views is, as its core, a query builder, meaning it's building complex and robust database queries in a graphical interface. And that's its real power. It just so happens that one of the many ways you can use the Views API is to display content on your main website. But it can also be used to display content on iPhones, in WebVR, in any number of experiences and devices. And then finally, we need to realize that content management systems, while they will remain web-based content management tools, meaning it's unlikely that anytime soon we are really going to start managing content on mobile devices or in VR experiences or through an Amazon Alexa skill. We're still probably going to open up a laptop or desktop and go into a browser, a full browser, and manage our content that way. But that doesn't mean that our delivery of that content or experiences should be web-centric. So we need to keep that in mind. Though the majority of our content editing time is spent in a web browser, that does not mean that the content itself will be mostly viewed in web browsers. Secondly, a modern CMS needs to decouple the front end from the back end, or at least be able to do so. Here's what I mean by that, because this is still an unfamiliar concept to the vast majority of folks out there. So this is the world that we've lived in until very recently, where the front end and the back end are all part of the CMS, where viewing the content and editing the content is all within one thing. But if we separate these two, and instead if we treat the front end as something separate, like a separate piece of software, and the CMS is focused only on editing the content, we are then separating the head, the front end, from the body, the back end. And this resulting architecture is referred to as decoupled, or in some cases headless. Decoupled is a more preferred term because it's a little less visceral than headless. So this is the world in which we live today, where front ends are separated from back ends. And when we talk about the front end, we most commonly mean your website, meaning the website that you see when you access it through a browser, either on a phone or a desktop or laptop. And when we talk about the back end, what we actually mean is content. So we're just really separating one of these display modes, the website, from the content management itself. Now, these two are still connected, of course. So if we're using a single CMS like Drupal to store and display content, Drupal has this thing called the theming layer. So in fact, Drupal is already decoupled, and WordPress is already decoupled in this way, and most CMSs actually, such that there's a theming layer or a set of themes or layouts that then consume the content that's stored in the database managed by the CMS. So this already exists, and this is just an API. When we say API, we basically just mean a connection between the content and how you view the content, how it gets sent to the front end. So this is decoupled architecture. A modern CMS also needs to support robust content modeling and structured data. And those two concepts are very closely related, but I wanted to separate them out because not everybody deals with, quote, content. A lot of people deal instead with lots of data, but it's really all the same thing. Content is data and data are content. So here's what we mean by that. Let's zoom in here into the content piece of this decoupled model. So we've all dealt with websites where we have pieces of content like an article, an author, an image, and a video. This is pretty standard stuff. A content model, first of all, this is the content model itself. You're looking at content types in blue and the individual fields in gray. This is a content model. It's simplified, but this is really all you need. The content model then also must map relationships between these fields and content types. So an article author is really the same as an author's name. So when you are writing an article and you're attributing that article to an author, you're actually doing a lookup of the author content type's name field. And then when you add a headshot to the author's bio, you're actually pulling an image content type of size, say, medium. And if you're attaching images or video to your article, you may be referencing one of the image sizes and one of the video resolutions. So this just shows you the kinds of relationships that you deal with within a content model. So a modern content management system should allow you to create content types on the fly. WordPress calls them post types, and create new fields on the fly, and then be able to relate them together. That is what is meant by a content model and by structured data. All right, so a modern CMS should also be able to centralize content. So here again, we have our website and our content. But let's start adding some of these extra sites. So I mentioned that we're running a big website and we have an event coming up. And that event requires a little bit of like registration and maybe some sponsorships. So we need to fire up a microsite about that event. Additionally, we decided that our company needed to add a blog, something that went beyond just press releases. So now we've added this blog. And these are all different URLs, or maybe they're different subdomains or subfolders on a website, but they're actually all connected to the same content store through an API. So that centralized content store is serving content to your main website, your microsites, and your blog, but it's all managed in one place. These are not separate websites in the siloed island sense. These are different front ends that attach to the same backend that manages all your content in one place. So that's what we mean by centralized content. A modern CMS should also quickly support new devices and experiences. A modern CMS does not treat the website as the primary experience. A modern CMS is multi-device, but not designed for specific devices. And that's because we can't predict the future. We don't know what devices or new interfaces are going to come along in a year or 2 or 3. So this means thinking about content first, not devices first. You should let your CMS deliver structured content and then let the device's software or application handle the rest of the work. So your CMS just needs to send a chunk of data to a place and allow that device or that piece of software to then interpret and display that content as it works best for that device. So if your content is properly modeled, if you have reusable fields and robust content types, you can very quickly support new devices and experiences. And one of the things that makes Drupal really great is the ability to quickly add new fields and content types. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here's this centralized content model that we talked about earlier. We've got our content being stored in one place. We have our website, our microsite, and our blog. And these are all like kind of variations on the theme website. These are all things that you can look at in a browser. Well, let's say somebody from marketing comes along and they say, oh, we got to have an iPhone app. And you think, well, okay, what do I need to do to make my existing content model work for an iPhone? Well, maybe I'll add a location field, and that location field will be used for location-aware devices. So if I'm a website that manages a lot of events, and maybe I'm a concert website, and I have tens of thousands of events and concerts happening all over the world at any given time, wouldn't it be useful if somebody using your iPhone app would only be shown the concerts in their geographic area when they loaded up the app, rather than events in San Francisco, New York, and Hong Kong, and Sydney? I mean, that makes sense, right? So you can add a location field to your content that didn't exist before, and then that can harness the location-aware ability of the iPhone app. And here's the other cool thing. Once you add a location field, because you're using a generic location field and not an iPhone-specific location field, you can now much more quickly add Android, Windows Phone, and other location-aware devices because your location field is reusable and robust. Now let's say somebody comes along and they're like, we got a lot of streaming video of all these concerts that we've done, and we want to be able to send them to streaming devices. Now, maybe they pick Roku because Roku is the most popular video streaming device on the market today. It has more users and more apps available than any other. So you pick Roku first. Well, now you need to start adding some metadata fields about video. You're going to want to know about video length, about video aspect ratio, tags related to video, users' reviews of videos. Like, what's one of the first things you think of when you think of Netflix? It's being able to rate the stuff that you watch and all that stuff being suggested to you through reviews and ratings. So that's some metadata that you'd want to add. Well, what's cool is once you add all that metadata for your videos, then that can be reused by YouTube, Vimeo, Apple TV, Samsung Smart TV applications, any number of other things, because now you've built a content model around video that is not locked into any one particular device. So marketing comes along again and they say, we've got all this great audio from the concerts that we've recorded. We want to be able to play that audio on Alexa, because a lot of people listen to music and podcasts and things like that in Alexa. Well, to be able to interact with Alexa, you need to have some additional fields that you add, and we'll talk about that when we've actually done that here at Four Kitchens in a few minutes. But you need to add like read aloud or conversational fields to Alexa, because Alexa reading the content that you already have character by character, word for word, doesn't always work out. So you now need to have some kind of additional field that can be read literally aloud with markup and everything. So once you do that, you have support for devices that convert text to speech. You now support Siri, you support Google Home, any number of other devices. Just because you added these fields for one particular use case, reading things aloud. Then we have stuff like feeds and accelerated mobile pages, AMP. Once you start adding support for feeds and AMP and things like that, those are remarkably similar to Facebook Instant Articles and Apple News. So now you have built-in support more or less for all of those other things. So rather than thinking about how do we build for Alexa, how do we build for Roku, how do we build for AMP, you should instead be thinking about how do we build for conversational interfaces like Alexa? How do we build for streaming devices like Roku? How do we build for feeds like AMP? And when you tie it all together using an API, what you see here is the future of the CMS. All of these front ends are first-class citizens. Everything starts with content. Content is created for multiple devices and experiences, stored in a central location, and distributed using an API. And your website, you'll note at the top here in this vast array of your digital strategy, is just one of many front ends and one of many ways that users can experience your content. A modern CMS then, once you have all these devices and this whole ecosystem built, a modern CMS should integrate with content-focused analytics. This is essentially what people say, what they mean when they say omni-channel. It means treating all of your content as a single thing regardless of the channel. So if you have a single story, maybe it's a late-breaking news item, that story could appear in text format on a website, in text format as an SMS sent out to subscribers, as a video for people on Roku, and as a soundbite on Alexa devices or on podcasting apps, but it's still the same piece of content. Don't you want to be able to track that piece of content across all of these different channels to measure the impact of that content, and not necessarily how many views did we get on YouTube, and then how many article reads did we get on our website, and then how many podcast downloads did we get on Stitcher, right? It's the same thing, it's just presented in different media. So rather than separately counting page views on the website and Apple News and Roku and the rest, treat them as a single piece of content across all channels. And this puts the user first, not the silos within your organization. It puts your entire audience first and not the video department or the audio department or the social media department. So let's summarize. The CMS of today should do the following things. It should put content management first. Let's put the C back in CMS. It needs to decouple the front end from the back end. Most modern CMSs already do this. CMS of today should support robust content modeling and data structures so that you can reuse data and fields across different experiences. It should centralize the content in one place so you can more easily add new front ends and endpoints and experiences. It should quickly support new devices and experiences as they are invented, because there's a lot of stuff coming out that we haven't even heard of yet. And it should integrate with content-focused analytics. This is what your CMS should be doing today. So I want to give you a couple of examples of what this would look like in the real world. I want to make this really practical. So let's say you want to be able to share content across multiple websites. And this example is especially relevant to large multi-departmental organizations like governments, universities, and large corporations. So multi-departments sharing content across departments. So I've got my website. Let's say I am a university and I work in strategic communications. So I'm responsible for all strategic communications that go out about our university. Well, Sarah is at the law school, and Frank is at the med school, and Laura is in arts and sciences, and Bob is at the graduate school. This is what it looks like at most universities. Every department, every office has their own website run by often their own IT team or one or two office or administrative assistants. And it's very complicated for me in strategic communications to know what's going on within every office and all of the content they produce without them telling me or without me visiting all of their websites on a regular basis. And let's face it, neither of those things are ever going to happen. So let's rethink my website in relation to this model that we discussed earlier. So at Strategic Communications, I decide that I want to create a centralized content store. and I'm going to separate my strategic communications website from that content store. And I'm going to treat it as a thing that exists outside of it. So now I'm decoupling, right? So I've got me, my site, and then I have the content that sits in the middle. And Frank has a website, Laura, Bob, Sarah, they all have websites that they relaunch that simply connect to this content store, right? So how does that then work in the real world? Now, let's say Sarah, I believe she was at the law school. Sarah publishes a really cool article about a Supreme Court decision regarding the patenting of genes. This is kind of a big deal. This is going to affect a lot of different people at the university. And I just happen to know that there's a really interesting genomics department at my university, and we really want to get more funding for gene research and genomics. So I really want to push any content I can find about genetics. Now, Sarah's in the law school, though, and Sarah has this law article, but it touches on something that's related to genomics. Well, she sends her article, because she's part of this content hub. It gets automatically sent to the content store in the center. And perhaps there's some kind of an interface that I've built that lets me filter all of the content that's being produced by all of the departments at the university or the government office or whatever, and filter it by tag. And she's tagged it law, Supreme Court, genetics. Well, I'm looking for material on genetics. I see this bubble up to the top of my list, and I think that's really cool. I click a button, I get that content syndicated to the main strategic communications website automatically. Plus, it has all of the metadata in the header to say, I am not the canonical source of the data. Sarah's department is the canonical source of the data. That way, Google doesn't ding me for having duplicated content on my site. And all of that can be handled automatically if you have a centralized content store like this set up. Now, what if Sarah has to make a change to the content because maybe there was an error or there was an update that's really important, and it's a substantive update? Before this content store existed, she would either have to know that I republished her article and then tell me that she made a change and tell me what the change was, and then I go in and edit it myself, or I would have had to actively be looking at her site and comparing her content to mine. But if her content simply changes a number or a date or a citation, I'm never going to notice it. So now we have out of sync content, and that might actually be dangerous, perhaps legally dangerous for us, right? So if you have this kind of model in place where you centralized your content, any changes automatically propagate back to the content store and then get pushed up to any other site that then syndicates that content. That's the power of centralizing content across multiple departments, and that's exactly the kind of architecture that headless and modern CMSs should be able to support. So that's the first real-world example. The second is the ability to publish the same content to different experiences. So here we have all of these different experiences. We looked at this earlier. We've got iPhone app and feeds and Alexa and website and blog and all kinds of stuff. Well, let's say I create a piece of text-based content. It's really text-heavy. It's a press release or something. Well, it's not necessarily appropriate for that piece of content to go out to every single channel because it's not a blog post and it's not really going to be useful on something like an iPhone app that has a lot of interactivity and tool-based stuff built into it. It's not video, it's not audio. So I'm going to selectively send it to the front ends that best display and work with text. And I don't send it to the ones where it's not going to play well. Let's consider a different kind of media. Let's say we have a video. Well, video works really well on all kinds of different platforms. It'll work on the website, Microsoft, and the iPhone app, and Roku, and that's cool and everything. But not everybody can really use video. If you have difficulty seeing, or if you are blind, then video is going to be a real challenge for you, especially if that video does not have any kind of transcript or subtitles or anything like that. So, while you simultaneously with producing the video, you need to produce some kind of a text-based document that allows people who cannot see the animations in the video or the graphs and charts or whatever it is you're trying to convey in the video. You have a text-based version that can be sent to things that are more text-oriented or that can be read aloud. So in this case, you might send it out to AMP and Feed and things like that. But you may also send it to Alexa, because Alexa, of course, has no capability of displaying video, at least in the most recent version of the Echo does, oddly, but the traditional Alexa devices don't. So you may want to have a transcript read aloud or some kind of accompanying text to be read aloud with the sound of the video. But this is the idea that we have the same piece of content, like the same narrative, the same story, but being displayed and consumed in different ways. Perhaps you want to add new devices while tracking content performance across those experiences. So you really want to understand how a certain piece of content plays, and you want to constantly be adding new devices, new channels, new experiences. It just so happens this is exactly what we helped NBC do. So here you see screenshots of some of the sites that we helped NBC build, NBC.com, Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and the SNL website, including the SNL 40 application where you can watch all of their sketches from 41 years online for free. So NBC has, as you'd imagine, a lot of data of lots of different formats, and it has to be delivered across many, many diverse platforms. They want to send it anywhere they can put NBC content: website, mobile devices, Amazon Alexa, Roku, Apple TV, you name it, they want to do it. They, of course, can't build multiple solutions for multiple devices, so they need a single and fast content solution across all of those devices. So they, with our help and with the help of some of our partners, we took a decoupled approach, and we helped them build a content API that allows them to rapidly deploy new devices to their digital strategy. And this opened the door for smarter content-focused analytics. These analytics are collected across devices and related back to specific pieces of content. This means they can track how popular a piece of content is rather than how many views it got on the website or which Jimmy Fallon video clips are most popular on Roku. They know which video clips are popular universally. And again, this is omni-channel. This allows us to create customized experiences across multiple devices. And this is highly relevant to retailers, but it's also relevant to people like educators. A site should know that they're a student who needs to register for classes, or a potential student that's halfway through the application process and needs a little nudge to finish. This is what omni-channel means. It's tracking that student and their application from the website to the SMS texting chatbot that they use to interact with admissions, to their Facebook page, to everywhere that they hang out. That's omni-channel. Additionally, with NBC, we built an Amazon Alexa skill. It was the first Amazon Alexa skill built for a broadcast television network. We were able to deploy this within just a few days, frankly, because of the well thought out and flexible content model that we had developed in partnership with them and some of their other partners. So because we had a really robust content model at NBC.com, we were able to very quickly add Amazon Alexa to their digital strategy by adding a single field to Drupal. We added one field to Drupal, and it allowed Alexa to work. And even without the field, it was more or less workable. So here's precisely what we had to do. So imagine you're talking with Alexa, and you know that the show that somebody wants to watch is on at 9/8 Central. We've often heard, oh, The Blind Spot will be on at 9/8 Central. Now, the way that's abbreviated on television ads and on the website is 9/8 lowercase c. That means 9/8 Central. So when you were to ask Amazon Alexa, before we made this one change, this one field that we added to Drupal, we would say, hey Alexa, when is The Blind Spot on NBC tonight? Alexa would say 9/8C. Now that doesn't really make sense when you listen to it, right? But it's reading it literally, it's 9/8C. So we added a new field, one new field, and it was Showtime Spoken. It's the same thing, except the word central, literally spelled out. So now Alexa reads 9/8 Central. That makes much more sense. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, why didn't you just add a parser to the Alexa app that could anticipate the letter C and simply read it as central? We totally could have done that. You're absolutely right. But here's the problem to that approach and why it flies in the face of everything that I've just said so far in this presentation. That shifts the content burden to the device. That means that for any device in the future, you're going to have to build a parser that turns C into Central for Siri, for Google Home, anything. This is not a sustainable approach because that means you're developing content for devices rather than building device agnostic content. So by adding this additional field, we now unlocked the ability for Google Home and Siri and any number of other conversational interfaces to use this content without having to build it into the app natively. So it's better to change it once in the content than change it a dozen times on every device. In some cases, you may need to make your content publicly accessible. And this is particularly relevant to organizations with really lively communities who like to share and remix content, but even more so to government offices, universities, grant-funded projects, any kind of public entity that is in many cases required by law to make content publicly accessible. Here's the cool thing about this approach. If you decouple your architecture and centralize your content in exactly the way that we've talked about before, you already have an API. It's already done. It's already there and accessible. And that allows you to publish an API that allows people to access your public data or maybe build their own fan site based on the content on your site. So if you're a government organization, you have a lot of statistics and metrics or just data that has to be public. If you have this architecture, you've already done it. You just need to publicly expose it and document it, and you're done. Now you may be thinking like, this fan site example seems a little weird. Here's the thing though, we did it. So a few years ago, we worked with Twit, This Week in Tech. They are a large podcast and video cast network. They do a lot of content about technology and society and everything ranging from ham radio to Android development to Apple rumors and web development. So they have a ton of content. Well, they also have a really amazing fan base. And this fan base, they knew, would want to remix and rework and customize their own content experiences. Because after all, they're producing content for Android development, iPhone development. Their audience are developers for these applications. So why not just expose their content to these people and allow them to build the apps for them for free? It's pretty brilliant, right? Like that way they can build a website and a publicly exposed API and their entire fan base can go in and create Apple TV apps and Roku apps and iPhone apps and whatever they want to do because they have a data source available to them for free. And guess what? People have really done this. They have apps all over the place with all kinds of devices that have been built more or less for free because their fan base has been excited enough to just want to try it out and see if it'll work. So I want to give a couple other examples of why a decoupled architecture was really appealing to Twit. And I'd like to actually quote the client on this. So this is from Leo Laporte. There are 4 reasons that he listed as to why they wanted to go decoupled. First, it's faster and easier to create new sites. Web design styles change faster than high fashion, so it's nice to be able to update the site without redoing all the hard work on the back end. And that's totally true. When you have a decoupled site, you can rework the front end as many times as you want, and you don't have to rebuild the back end all the time. Also, having a complete API would make it easier to do apps, as I mentioned earlier. The app, just like the website, would have access to everything there is to know about Twit in a simple, accessible fashion. This allowed them to build a whole host of apps and have apps built for them. By making the API public, we encourage members of our audience to create new things we might never have thought of. You could even design a website you like better. Abstracting the content from the presentation seems like a big win. And finally, by keeping Drupal simple and avoiding additional third-party modules, we can create a more secure and reliable backend that will be much easier to upgrade when future versions of Drupal arrive. So when we decoupled, all the front-end stuff existed in a node-based JavaScript library that we built. You didn't have to add any Drupal modules and whatever to do any of the front-end display, so we were able to keep the back end of the site very, very trim and very minimal. So anytime there's an update in Drupal, it's much, much faster to upgrade. So these organizations that are able to rapidly deploy applications like NBC and like Twit, like what is it that makes them so successful? Why are they able to do this stuff so rapidly? It's because of the internet on the fridge. Everybody remembers the internet on the fridge, right? Well, it's kind of silly to have internet on a fridge, but the funny thing is, the same things that make it possible to have content on your fridge, and we've all rolled our eyes at this idea, right? Like, it is totally ridiculous to have, like, the last thing you really want is a bunch of apps on a fridge. But the same things that make it possible for you to do this, that make it cost effective and simple to just experiment and see what works, are the exact same things that make NBC's Alexa integration, Netflix's world-class VR experience, etc., possible with minimal investment. So because they have things like agile project management and development practices, decoupled architecture, future thinking content models, a focus on content and not specific devices, and strong API designs, organizations like NBC and TWIT and others are able to rapidly deploy new experiences and new devices because they have a really solid foundation built. So it's interesting that, like, all of this is kind of piling on and coming together, that agile and focus on content design and API design and DevOps and continuous integration and all of these things have just magnified our ability to rapidly deploy new apps. So I mentioned Netflix earlier. It's worth noting that Netflix was able to release an excellent VR experience in Daydream just weeks after the platform was released because they had a decoupled style architecture in place and they were ready to absorb new experiences and new devices. All right, in the last few minutes, I want to talk about what I think is coming up next for content management systems and what we need to keep our eye on. We're going to see a rise in WMSs. I'm kind of making up this term, but I don't know. Maybe it'll stick. Website management systems. These are services like Squarespace. There are a lot of people out there that just have really simple websites. Maybe they're temporary sites, maybe they're just resumes or blogs or whatever, and they do not want to download and install and manage the software that powers a content management system. They just want to pay somebody to make that problem go away. We're seeing Squarespace rapidly erode huge portions of the CMS market. And that's simply going to continue because it's just so easy. 2, front-end technologies are accelerating, and frankly, the CMSs can't keep pace. JavaScript libraries and new experiences and design patterns and things like that are being released, it seems like almost daily. And CMSs, which require a lot of thoughtful planning and testing and user research. I mean, these are big platforms. WordPress, Drupal, these are big, important platforms. CMSs simply can't keep pace with the incredible acceleration of front end. So we're going to see these content management systems really focus on what's important in the long term, and that's content. Again, doubling down on content, putting the C back in content management systems. So we're going to see additionally some hosted content management services like Contentful, where you manage your content on a third-party system, and then it simply provides you with an API, and you plug that API into whatever site you build using React or whatever, and you've got yourself a website. So we're going to see more of a focus on content because the front-end stuff is just moving too fast. Similarly, we have to design for experiences and not just devices. That doesn't mean, for example, that responsive web design isn't important. It's still core to how we present the web. But the internet, as we think of it, is no longer the only place where your content is relevant. It's going to be in display ads. It's going to be spoken to you. It's going to be part of a conversational interface or chat bot that you use on Slack. These are totally different experiences, but all of this content still has to be managed in one place, and it's going to be in your CMS. I've already mentioned conversational interfaces. There's some really interesting stuff happening here. And as artificial intelligence and things like sentiment analysis become more and more mature, we're going to see people conversing with computers both through spoken, aloud, auditory interfaces and typed chat style interfaces more and more. It's still a little rudimentary right now, and it still kind of feels like, I'm trying to predict what the machine wants to hear rather than me just telling the machine what I want it to do. We've all had the experience where we word something to Alexa, and Alexa's like, I don't get what you're trying to get me to do, and then you just change a couple words around, and then suddenly Alexa knows what you're talking about, right? We've all had that experience, but that's getting better and better, and it's really accelerating. One thing to ponder, though, and I don't mean to turn into like futurism or anything at this point, but something to consider about what it will take to make conversational interfaces work universally, like in your house. Imagine you're walking around your house or apartment, and you say, "Turn on the lights," or what's the capital of North Dakota? And your house or the computer or whatever device, hears you and looks up the answer or does the action or whatever. In terms of infrastructure, like physically, what needs to happen to your home to make that possible? It means that every room in your home will have to have a microphone. Is that really what we want? Like, is 2017 going to be the year that we invite corporate America into every room in our house? Like, let's just hit the pause button on that for a moment and make sure that we really want to do that. But there's a chance that that might not actually be necessary, because there are some really interesting technologies on the horizon that involve subvocalization or even voiceless microphones. So there are technologies that already exist in military and a lot of security applications where you can very quietly whisper, and there's a small microphone kind of glued to your neck or stuck against your neck, and it can pick up on very, very, very tiny sound vibrations. So you can whisper very quietly and not be heard by even somebody standing next to you, but still communicate. Stuff like that's used by the military all the time. But there are devices on the horizon that just simply use thought, where you can think something and make something happen. We're seeing this already with people who have suffered paralysis, being able to control devices, across the room, and who's to say that that can't translate into complex thoughts and sentences and wishes? So it may be that we don't actually need a mic at all in our house for our house to know what we're thinking. I don't know. Ponder that for a moment. We're also going to see a vast and terrifyingly fast rise in virtual and augmented reality, and we're seeing it already. There's all kinds of cool stuff happening here. And there's a broad spectrum of what we mean by VR or AR. I mean this in the broadest possible definition. I'm including immersive 360-degree photos and videos as a VR or AR experience. So we've all seen AR and VR on like Facebook, where you can kind of click and drag and look around, or you hold up your smartphone and like use it as a keyhole into a VR world. We've all kind of experienced that, and that's going to get really, really big pretty soon. Also, though, some of you may know about Apple's announcement of the AR toolkit, augmented reality toolkit. Lots of people are doing this. Apple's actually a little behind the ball on this, but lots of like 3D modeling, object modeling in the browser, which is really neat, and being able to use the camera on your phone as a pass-through camera that then displays that video feed in a browser, and then you can lay things on top of reality, which is also pretty cool. So this scene in Fight Club from 18 years ago is already happening. Object recognition, doing lookups in catalogs, knowing how much things cost, product names, SKUs, all of that. This already exists. A year ago, I said this will happen soon, but no, it's already here. And finally, the big takeaway for the future of content in general will be context-aware content. This is like progressive enhancement from the mobile days taken to the next level. So when the mobile revolution first happened about 10 years ago and the iPhone was released and suddenly everybody had a browser, a good browser on their phone, we had to start designing for these smaller interfaces and for touch interfaces. And like, what does scrolling look like, and how do we hide the menus properly, and all of these design patterns that we've been wrestling with for the past 10 years. There was a design philosophy that arose from dealing with all of this called progressive enhancement, where you would deliver the simplest, dumbest, easiest version of the website first. And as the capabilities of the device improved, the experience of the content would improve. So if you had a feature phone, like an old Nokia or a BlackBerry, you'd get the raw, like a couple of images and text version of the website. But then if you had an iPhone, you'd get, slightly bigger images and you'd get richer typography. And then if you had a desktop, you'd get like the full-blown web experience. That was the idea of progressive enhancement. Well, that same kind of philosophy can be applied to content across contexts. So as you have a device that is just a flat screen, you're going to get a two-dimensional version of that content. If you have a device that allows you to work with VR or AR, then that content might start to come alive a little bit more. There might be the opportunity to look around the space or to lay three-dimensional objects or heads-up displays or modals over the content that you're looking at. There might be audio that then people can interact with if it's an audio device. That's what context-aware content means, is that it's paying attention to the device that you're on and the capabilities of the device, and then giving you that content in the right context. That's it for me for now. We have a couple of minutes for questions. And if there's not time, I'm always happy to field your questions or continue the conversation. You can email me here at todd@4kitchens.com, or just ping me on Twitter.